The year I turned 16, I was reborn. I only did one thing. I stayed as far away from Julian as possible. In my past life, everyone saw him as a freak. He had severe autism. On our first day of high school, he was mocked for his stutter and suddenly fell to the ground, seizing. I was the one who carried him to the nurse's office. After that, I stayed by his side, constantly encouraging him. By the time he was 30, he won the Field's Medal, the highest honor in mathematics. Right after winning, he committed suicide, leaving behind only a single diary. That diary was filled with confessions to another woman, Vivian. It turned out that all those years, the one he loved wasn't me. It was Vivian. He had even left our house to her and his will. Heartbroken and devastated, I died on a freezing, snowy Christmas Eve. Now that I was reborn, I watched as Vivian actively went up to greet Julian. As for me, I quietly moved my desk to the farthest corner of the classroom, as far away from Julian as possible. Vivian became Julian's lab partner, and, because of that, she was instantly ostracized by the rest of the class. The boy sitting behind her slipped a dead rat into her backpack. When she opened it, her face drained of all color and she let out a blood-curdling shriek. Nobody expected Julian to snap. He flipped the boy's desk over, slammed the rat right into his face, and tackled him to the ground. They instantly ended up in a brutal fist fight. I just watched coldly from my seat. In my past life, I was the one who had a rat thrown at me. But when I screamed in terror, Julian had only glared at me, annoyed by the noise. He hated how loud I was. Seeing his reaction, the rest of the class mocked me for simping for a freak and called me desperate for attention. After that, the bullying only got worse. Yet I was naive enough to think Julian and I were in the same boat. When he refused to clear his cluttered binders off our shared desk, I would hunch my shoulders and write on a tiny corner of the wood. When he blocked the aisle and wouldn't let me out of my seat by the wall, I would hold my breath and wait. I'd have to climb over the back desks when the rowdy boys in the back weren't looking. 3 years of high school, I barely dared to drink a sip of water, just to avoid using the bathroom. But he remained completely indifferent, treating me like air. Yet now Julian, who had always lived in his own bubble, actually cleared his things for Vivian. He even fought someone for her. How hilarious. The things I couldn't achieve in a lifetime, Vivian did in a single minute after the teacher broke up the fight. Vivian gratefully slid a piece of fruit candy onto Julian's desk. She gently patted his head, treating him like a kicked puppy. Thanks for helping me.
You're so sweet.
It is their loss if they don't want to hang out with you. As she spoke, she threw a provocative glance in my direction. I frowned at the same time, though I wasn't sure if it was just my imagination. Julian's gaze drifted toward me for a split second before darting away. Cold it be, he was reborn too. By lunchtime, the temperature in the classroom rose, and a foul odor began to emanate from Julian. Vivian had already gagged twice, and quietly dragged her chair outward 3 times. By the time her chair was halfway into the hallway, Vivian forced a smile, trying her best to sound gentle. Julian, do you want to go to the restroom and clean up a bit? Julian had injured his leg when he first enrolled, so he walked with a heavy limp. Because of this, was always the first to arrive in the classroom and the last to leave. He hated getting up from his seat. In my past life, to protect his fragile self-esteem, I lied to everyone and said I worked a night shift at a greasy seafood shack, claiming the fishy smell came from me, even when the stench made me sick to my stomach. I swallowed my vomit and never made a sound. Vivian's gagging drew the attention of the entire class. She seemed oblivious to it, continuing to coax him with fake patience. She probably thought Julian liked her,
So he would do whatever she said.
but Julian just kept shaking his head, as if that was the only gesture he knew. Vivian got a little annoyed. Julian, hygiene is important. I am only doing this for your own good. Julian's jaw clenched tight. That was a sign of his extreme impatience. I had seen that expression once in my past life. That time, he had sunk his teeth into my arm, leaving a bloody, mangled mess. The wound kept getting infected, and it took a whole month to barely heal. Vivian kept nagging. I surprised Julian didn't bite her. Instead, he pulled out a pocket knife and slashed his own arm. Blood welled up instantly. I subconsciously touched the faint scar on my own arm, so Julian could control his violent urges. He just chose not to control them for me. Ignoring the sight of him bleeding, I turned around and started laughing and chatting with my new friends. This time, Julian was just a stranger. He had nothing to do with me anymore. It's during gym class, when we were pairing up for the buddy fitness run. Julian's eyes locked onto me. Julian, do you want to partner up with Chloe? The teacher asked. He nodded without a single second of hesitation. The eddy run meant one partner had to carry the other's heavy gear, or even carry them physically if they couldn't keep up. Partnering with Julian meant I would have to drag him across the finish line. It had always been like this in my past life. But back then, I was the one who volunteered. This time, I hadn't said a word. My heart skipped a beat as I met his expectant, entitled gaze. He really was reborn. I spoke up immediately, Coach. I already have a partner, Ray. Julian's face froze. He hadn't expected me to reject him. He shot a hostile look at Logan, who was standing next to me. Logan just smiled back at me reassuringly. In my past life, Logan was the only person in class who had never joined in on the bullying. During my response, the coach sighed and tried to find Julian another partner. But Julian shut down completely. He stood in the middle of the field with his head bowed, refusing to move. He looked like an abandoned puppy. I used to be fooled by this exact look. Now it only annoyed me. But the coach didn't know his true nature. He forced the two of us into a group anyway. Julian climbed onto my back with practiced ease. On my shoulder, his raspy voice whispered the first words he had spoken to me since our rebirth. Why didn't you choose me? I countered. And why didn't you choose Vivian? Didn't he leave her 100 love letters and his entire estate? Why didn't he choose her now? He gripped my collar tightly. She'll hold me back, my chest. A wave of bitter resentment washing over me. He really was consistent, wasn't he, Chloe? He called my name. Let's just keep things the way they were. I couldn't take it anymore. I dumped him right off my back onto the grass. Keep things the way they were. Servicing you for over 20 years. Making my entire life revolve around you. He frowned, looking genuinely confused. Is that not okay? My heart felt like it was being sliced by a dull blade over and over. Now, Julian, I said, coldness dripping from every word. In my past life, I didn't know you loved Vivian, but now I do. So stay the hell away from me. Once high school is over, I am applying to college on the other side of the country. We will never see each other again. I choked back my tears and ran off. But the moment I stopped running at the end of the track, Julian suddenly stumbled over and threw up, all over my head and shoulders. The entire class burst into roaring laughter. Without a shred of mercy, I pushed him straight to the ground. Julian stared up at me, fazed by the fall. He looked at my covered, filthy clothes, his eyes still filled with that innocent, uncomprehending look. I thought he just didn't get it. But when Vivian rushed over to help him up, Julian pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket. With obsessive care, he wiped Vivian's hands clean. I am dirty, he mumbled. Vivian chuckled. How could you be dirty, Julian? She then turned to me, standing on her moral high ground with an annoyed expression. He only threw up because you ran too fast and jostled him. How could you just dump him on the ground like that? Don't you know he could have been seriously hurt? Covered in vomit? I only wanted to change my clothes. But Vivian wouldn't let it go. No way. You have to apologize to Julian right now. I looked at Julian.
Yo.
And if I apologize, will you leave me alone? He avoided my eyes, turning his head away, and practically ran off. I let out a cold laugh. See that, Vivian? He doesn't want my apology. Though I couldn't partner with Logan for the gym run, we quickly became close friends. This was the first time I had ever had a friend other than Julian. We often went to the local library to study, and on weekends, we went to amusement parks. Life was peaceful and beautiful. I thought I had finally broken free from Julian's shadow and could live my own life. Until one day in the middle of a packed public library, Julian limped up to my table in front of everyone. He threw a damp, dirty gym bag right onto my open textbook. Inside were his soiled underwear. Wash it, he demanded. Mutterings and whispers instantly broke out around us. The stares directed at me were filled with shock and disgust. My face flushed crimson, my hands shaking with rage. I slammed the bag onto the floor and tried to focus back on my study guide, but the bag was thrown right back. This time it hit me square in the face. My extent. Vivian, who had followed Julian inside, spoke in a sweet, dripping voice. I am so sorry, Chloe, Julian said. You've always done his laundry. I offered to help, but he held my hand and said, this kind of dirty work isn't for me. Whispering around us grew loud enough for me to hear every word. Oh my God. Does Chloe actually wash Julian's underwear? But isn't Vivian Julian's girlfriend? Chloe is still doing his laundry? That is so shameless. And that instant, I felt like I was dragged right back into the nightmare of my past. Life being pointed at and judged by everyone. Logan grabbed my hand. Chloe, let's go study somewhere else. Okay, I choked out. But Julian grabbed my arm from behind. He glared unhappily at our joint hands. Why won't you wash it? Is it because you're going to wash his instead? A few people in the library snickered. I couldn't stay there for another second. Logan looked at me with deep sorry. I covered my face, feeling a sense of self-destructive despair. Maybe to Julian, I was never anything more than a maid. Someone destined to serve him. Even though we were reborn, he still refused to let me go. Logan comforted me. Chloe, Julian is out of his mind. Don't listen to a word he says. Force myself to pull things together. I applied for the early decision interview for Apex University. Julian had already been admitted to Beacon University. This time we wouldn't be at the same school. I wouldn't have to follow him around like a shadow anymore. But the moment I pushed open the door to the interview room, my heart sank. Julian was sitting right there in the student assistant's chair, staring at me blankly. And after I finished answering all the professor's questions, he offered a single evaluation. Chloe has zero talent. She is not cut out for this major. The very next day, his words spread like wildfire across our high school. People whispered, Chloe isn't made for academics, but she sure has a talent for washing a guy's underwear. Some bullies even started calling me laundry girl. Straight to my face. Julian's presence was dragging me back into my worst nightmares. Logan didn't know the full history between us, but seeing my agony, he gently asked, why don't we just study abroad? Logan's words woke me up. I immediately started preparing my transfer applications with him. We stopped going to school altogether, with me actively avoiding him. Julian didn't show up in front of me again. Finally, Logan and I boarded a plane to Europe. A month later, I had fully adjusted to my new life in Scotland. I excitedly shared some news with Logan. There is a prestigious mathematics competition group here. If I get in, the scholarship will cover my entire tuition. He encouraged me to go for it, to step out of Julian's shadow and prove my own worth. I studied day and night, barely even remembering to eat. My hard work paid off. A senior student, Austin, said he would introduce me to the head of the competition group. I thought everything was finally going my way until I saw Julian again. He was the head of the competition group. Austin patted my shoulder warmly. You should have told me you knew the legendary Julian dance. He specifically requested you to join. But hey, your test scores are actually amazing. My entire body began to shake uncontrollably. Julian's voice sounded like a demon whispering in my ear. Long time no see, Chloe. From now on, you'll be my personal assistant. With that, he dropped a heavy laundry bag right in front of me. Please wash these for me. My hands and feet went icy cold. I looked at him, practically begging, why? Why do you have to humiliate me like this? That familiar confused look returned to his eyes. Chloe, isn't it good for us to be together like we used to be? As I spiraled into fear and anger, Vivian pushed the door open with a sweet smile. My late. We should start the meeting to discuss the thesis problem. Austin nudged me.
Hey.
Snap out of it. It is meeting time. But Julian stopped me from entering the conference room. She isn't attending the meeting, Julian said flatly. She needs to stay out here and do my laundry. Vivian smiled and explained to Austin. Austin, you didn't know Chloe is Julian's exclusive assistant. Why else do you think he brought her into this elite group? Under Austin's strange, judgmental gaze, I fled the building, humiliated once again. Logan was waiting for me at the entrance, holding a bouquet of red roses. The moment he saw me, his smile faded. Hey, it is your first day with the group. I was worried you wouldn't get used to seeing my pale face. I threw myself into his arms. His expression darkened. What happened? Who messed with you, Logan? I cried out. It is Julian. He is here. He is at this university too. How is that possible? I didn't understand either. He was supposed to be at Beacon University in the US. I had literally moved across the ocean, choosing a completely different country, yet he was still here. Julian, who was supposed to be in the meeting, walked out of the building. He stared dead at Logan and called out to me, Chloe, get over here. Logan shielded me behind his back. She is resigning from the group. She doesn't have to listen to you anymore. Chloe belongs to me, Julian said, his eyes filled with dark, obsessive possession. Logan patted my back comfortingly. She doesn't belong to you. She is my girlfriend, and I want you to stay the hell away from her. Stop harassing my girlfriend. Austin, who had followed Julian out, looked utterly shocked. Julian, are you seriously chasing after a girl who has a boyfriend and making her do your laundry? Dude, that is incredibly messed up. But Julian looked genuinely blank. Messed up? Of course it is messed up. They're dating. They're probably going to get married and spend their lives together. Stop trying to ruin their relationship. When the words get married and spend their lives together registered in Julian's brain, his eyes suddenly turned bloodshot. He took a step forward, trying to grab my hand. Chloe is mine. She can only marry me. The words hung in the biting Scottish air like shards of frost. Chloe is mine. She can only marry me. Julian's hand shot out, his fingers crooked like iron talons aiming for my wrist. In my past life, that grip had left yellow-green bruises across my skin. Whenever he felt overstimulated, panicked, or hungry. Back then, I had told myself it was just his condition, that the bruises were badges of devotion, proof that I was his solitary tether to a world he couldn't comprehend. This time, I didn't wait for the blow. Before his fingers could graze my sleeve, I stepped backward behind Logan. Logan didn't merely block him. He caught Julian's reaching wrist in a tight, unyielding vice and shoved it down. "Touch her again," Logan said, his voice dropping into a quiet, lethal register. I had never heard from him before, and I won't care about your leg, your medals, or your mental state. I will break your fingers. Julian stumbled back against the stone balustrade of the mathematics building. His uneven leg gave out slightly, and he bumped hard against the masonry. His eyes widened, pupils dilating into pitch-black pools. In his mind, the universe was an immutable set of axioms. Julian was the center, numbers were the law, and Chloe was the domestic constant that kept the machinery running while he contemplated the infinite. A violent error had occurred in his calculations, and his brain simply refused to compute the variable named Logan. "Chloe," Julian wheezed, his chest heaving under his rumpled flannel shirt. A fleck of spit gathered at the corner of his mouth. You have to take the laundry. It's Tuesday. You do the linens on Tuesday. Listen to yourself, you psychotic freak," Austin yelled, stepping between Julian and the courtyard path. Austin's face was dark with outrage. "She's a fellow scholar. She scored the highest marks on the entrance assessment in 5 years. And you brought her here to wash your filthy clothes? What is wrong with you?" Vivian stepped out from the double doors, having finally realized the audience wasn't playing along with her script. Her painted lips parted in a delicate, rehearsed gasp. "Austin, please, you don't understand Julian's special circumstances," Vivian cooed, rushing to Julian's side and placing a gentle, performative hand on his shoulder. "Julian has severe sensory issues. He can only tolerate clothes washed with a very specific, unscented formulation done by hand so the fibers don't stiffen. In high school, Chloe always did it out of kindness. We thought she would want to help him adjust to Scotland." "You thought wrong," I said. My voice didn't shake. The trembling in my limbs had stopped the moment Logan took my hand. I looked directly at Vivian, then shifted my gaze to Julian. "I am not your maid, Julian. I am not your mother. And I am certainly not your wife," I stated, every syllable crisp, deliberate, and loud enough for the gathering crowd of European postgrads to hear clearly. "If your clothes are dirty, burn them or wash them yourself. If you ever put your hands on me, or my belongings again, I will file a formal complaint with the Department of Academic Conduct and take out a restraining order with the Edinburgh Police." Julian's jaw worked soundlessly. You left the house to her," he muttered, the logic of his past life bleeding through his broken speech. "In the diary, I gave her the house, but you were supposed to stay. You were supposed to be there when I woke up." The confession slipped out of him like a severed wire sparking in the rain. To the onlookers, it sounded like the disjointed ramblings of a manic prodigy. But to me, it was the final, pathetic confession of his bottomless selfishness. He hadn't loved Vivian with noble, poetic tragedy. He had placed Vivian on an untouchable pedestal of pure, romantic aesthetics, a muse who was never stained by his saliva, his rage, or his spoiled undergarments, while keeping me chained in the basement of his daily survival, feeding the furnace with my youth until I froze to death on a Christmas Eve while he slept in a warm bed of stolen laurels. "I died once because of your delusion, Julian," I whispered, leaning in just close enough for him to hear my undertone over the wind. "I will not let you kill me a second time." I turned on my heel. "Let's go, Logan." Logan wrapped an arm securely around my shoulders, turning me away from the steps. Austin followed us, muttering furious curses under his breath and vowing to take the matter directly to the dean of the mathematics faculty. Behind us, Julian let out an eerie, high-pitched keening sound, the exact sound he used to make when I refused to peel his grapes or when the lights in our dilapidated apartment were too bright. "Julian, stop, people are looking." Vivian's hissed whisper drifted after us, laced with raw irritation. "Get up. Stop making a scene." I didn't turn back. Not once. The next morning, Austin kept his word. By 9 o'clock, Professor Alistair MacLeod, a formidable, silver-bearded Scottish topologist who headed the International Research Cluster, called an emergency departmental review. Austin had submitted a formal report regarding Julian's harassment and attempted subjugation of a junior candidate. I sat in Professor MacLeod's book-lined office with Logan beside me. "Miss Vance," MacLeod said, peering over his half-moon spectacles as he examined my entrance test proofs. "Your work on the Hodge conjecture's algebraic cycles is remarkably original. Frankly, it is far more coherent than the scattered fragments Julian Dance submitted for the same module." "Julian works purely on intuition, Professor," I said calmly. "He produces brilliant sparks, but he has never possessed the discipline to construct a rigorous, step-by-step foundation on his own. In the past life, that foundation had been built with my blood. Julian would scribble manic, illegible runes on napkins, walls, and floorboards during his manic episodes. I spent countless nights deciphering his chicken scratch, cross-referencing mathematical literature, fixing his arithmetic oversights, and typing up the formal manuscripts that eventually won him international acclaim. He took the medal, I took the chronic tendinitis and the empty pantry." "I see," MacLeod rumbled, stroking his beard. "Mr. Dance is funded by an external private endowment that insisted on his appointment as a group lead. However, this university does not tolerate feudal subjugation disguised as eccentric genius. You are hereby assigned directly to my personal research laboratory with a full independent fellowship." When I walked out of the office, I felt as though 50 pounds of iron had been lifted from my ribcage. Yet Julian was not someone who lived in reality. Without my silent labor, Julian's life began to unravel with terrifying speed. Because he refused to let university housing staff enter his flat, the luxury apartment the endowment had rented for him quickly descended into a squalid den. Used takeout containers piled up to the ceiling, the stench of rotting food and unwashed laundry drifted into the hallway. Vivian, who had envisioned herself as the glamorous, intellectual muse to a world-renowned Fields medalist, suddenly found herself trapped in a waking nightmare. I saw them 3 weeks later in the Student Union Cafe. Julian was wearing a coat with 2 missing buttons and a collar ringed with yellow grime. His hair was matted, his fingernails rimmed with black dirt. Across the table, Vivian looked haggard. The flawless foundation she usually wore couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes, and her designer sweater smelled distinctly of sour milk. "Julian, you have to write the midterm review paper," Vivian pleaded, her voice trembling on the verge of tears. "The committee is threatening to pull the grant. I typed out your notes, but the professor said they are nonsensical scribbles. What does this symbol mean?" Julian stared blankly at the sugar dispenser, his fingers violently twisting a metal spoon until the handle bent in two. "Chloe knows," Julian muttered in a robotic drone. "Chloe transcribes the symbols. Where is Chloe?" "Chloe is gone," Vivian finally snapped, slamming her manicured hands onto the table. "She's working with MacLeod. She's dating Logan.
She doesn't give a damn
About you. Look at me, Julian. I am your partner. I am the one you wrote all those letters to." Julian slowly turned his bloodshot eyes toward her. His expression wasn't one of love or reverence. It was a cold, clinical appraisal that bordered on disgust. "You smell bad," Julian said flatly. "You don't fold the papers by edge.
You talk too loudly.
You are useless." Vivian's face drained of color. "What did you say?" Chloe was quiet. Julian continued, rocking back and forth in his seat with mechanical rhythm. "Chloe washed the blood when I cut.
Chloe didn't ask
Questions about the proofs. She just fixed the margins. You are loud. You don't know algebraic topology. You are just noise. You arrogant, disabled monster." Vivian shrieked, all pretense of gentleness shattering into pieces. "I gave up my admission in the States to follow you. Here, I told everyone I was going to be the wife of a genius. And you treat me like trash? You can't even button your own damn shirt." She grabbed her handbag and stormed out of the cafe, leaving Julian rocking alone amidst the stares and whispers of 50 students. I sat by the window in the far corner, watching the spectacle over the rim of my coffee cup. Logan placed his warm hand over mine. "Do you want to leave?" "No," I said softly, taking a sip of the hot roast. "For the first time in 2 lifetimes, I'm enjoying the show." deprived of his domestic cushion and unable to produce a coherent paper for the upcoming European Mathematical Colloquium. Julian's desperation turned
Predatory.
one rainy Thursday in November. Our departmental library was nearly deserted. Logan had gone to the faculty office to submit our joint paper on non-commutative geometry, leaving me alone in the private study alcove, surrounded by stacks of reference journals. A sudden gust of damp, rancid air signaled his presence before I even heard his footsteps. Julian appeared in the doorway of the alcove. He had lost weight. His cheekbones jutted out like knives beneath his pale, paper-thin skin. His eyes burned with an unhealthy, manic fever. "Chloe," he breathed, blocking the narrow exit. I closed my notebook immediately, slipping my fountain pen into my pocket.
Step
"Back, Julian. I'm calling security." "You solved the boundary conditions for the Ricci flow," he said, ignoring my threat completely. He pointed a trembling, ink-stained finger at my closed binder. "I saw your preliminary abstract on McLeod's board. You fixed the singularity problem I couldn't crack." "I solved it," I said icily. "With Logan. We worked on it for 4 months." "Logan is an idiot," Julian suddenly roared, slapping his palm against the wooden bookshelf. Several heavy volumes of the Annals of Mathematics tumbled to the floor with a series of loud thuds. "He doesn't have the intuition. You used my ideas. In the past life, you were my assistant. Everything in your head belongs to me. You stole my theorem." I stood up, holding my ground, staring into his bloodshot eyes without an ounce of the fear I used to harbor. "In the past life, Julian, you never solved the Ricci flow singularities. You hit a wall at age 28, threw a tantrum, smashed our only laptop, and stayed in bed for 3 months while I worked 3 tutoring jobs to pay for your antipsychotics. I wrote the foundational lemma that saved your thesis. You didn't give me your genius. You sucked the life out of mine." Julian's face twitched violently. His hands reached into his coat pockets. For a terrifying second, I thought he was pulling out the pocket knife he used
to carry.
Instead, he pulled out a thick, dog-eared notebook bound in faded maroon leather. The diary. The very diary that had destroyed my soul on that snowy Christmas Eve. "Look at it," Julian screamed, thrusting the battered book toward my chest. "Read it. Look what I wrote. I didn't touch it. I read it once before I froze to death. I have no interest in your love letters to Vivian. They weren't love letters," Julian yelled, his voice cracking into a ragged
sob.
He began tearing at the pages with wild, uncoordinated fingers, ripping sheets out and shoving them against the glass table. "Look at the dates. Look at the margins." My eyes inadvertently caught a glimpse of the torn paper pinned beneath his trembling fingers. The handwriting was erratic, dense, and full of crossed-out equations.
But
amidst the mathematical ramblings and Vivian's name, there were lines that made my blood run cold with revulsion. "May 14th. Vivian smiled at me today. She is clean.
she has no scars from my teeth.
If I love Vivian, it means I am a normal man. It means I am not a freak who lives like a parasite on Chloe." October 3rd. Chloe smelled like bleach again. Her fingers are red from the detergent. I hate seeing her hands. They make me feel guilty. If I write Vivian's name 50 times, the guilt stops. December 12th. I won the medal. But Chloe looks old. Her eyes are dead. I did this to her. If I leave the house to Vivian, Chloe can finally leave. She won't have to carry me anymore. She will be free. But I cannot live without the foundation. So, I must end the program. I stared at the pages, a sickening wave of comprehension washing over me. It was never grand, poetic romance. It was the pathological, cowardly rationalization of a broken mind that couldn't bear the weight of its own monstrous ingratitude. He had used Vivian's name as an emotional talisman, a fantasy barrier to protect his fragile ego from the horrifying truth that he was destroying the only human being who had ever truly loved him. He hadn't loved Vivian. He had used Vivian as an excuse to avoid feeling guilty for draining me dry. And in doing so, he had ensured my absolute destruction. "You see?" Julian gasped, tears carving clean trails through the dirt on his
cheeks.
"I was doing it for you. I killed myself, so you wouldn't have to carry
me.
I left the house to Vivian so you wouldn't be burdened with the mortgage.
I
loved you, Chloe. Let's go home. Please, wash my coat. It's so cold here.
I
can't think without you." He reached out, his face twisted into a pathetic, pleading mask, attempting to fall to his knees and wrap his arms around my waist. I stepped sideways, letting him collapse face first onto the dusty hardwood
Floor.
"You didn't die for me, Julian," I said, looking down at his pathetic, shivering frame with nothing left inside me but absolute, sterile disgust. "You died because you couldn't face what you were. And you still can't." The heavy oak doors of the library burst open. Logan, accompanied by 2 campus security officers and the senior librarian, rushed down the aisle. "Get away from her," Logan shouted, pulling me firmly behind him while the 2 officers pinned Julian's arms behind his back. Julian didn't fight the guards. He lay on the floor, surrounded by the ripped, fluttering pages of his own twisted psyche, his eyes fixed on the hem of my
Coat.
"Chloe," he whimpered, his voice muffled against the floorboards.
The
"Proof. Without you, the proof doesn't converge." "The proof converges perfectly, Julian," I said, leaning into Logan's warmth. "It just doesn't include you." The European Mathematical Colloquium held at the McEwen Hall in Edinburgh was the defining academic event of the winter. Scholars from Cambridge, Princeton, the Sorbonne, and Bonn packed the circular auditorium beneath the towering frescoed dome. Julian's private endowment had pulled strings to secure him a speaking slot on the final morning, hoping to redeem their massive investment. Vivian, desperate to salvage her social standing and scholarship, had spent the entire week calling reporters, boasting that her partner was about to unveil a generational breakthrough. When Julian walked onto the stage, an uncomfortable murmur rippled through the audience of distinguished professors. He wore an oversized suit that hung from his emaciated frame like a burial shroud. His hair was wildly unkempt, his eyes sunken and darting erratically across the blinding spotlight. Behind him on the stage's projector screen, his handwritten slides were projected. Vivian stood in the wings, her arms crossed, biting her nails raw. Julian approached the podium. He gripped the wooden edges so tightly his knuckles turned white. He opened his mouth, but only a dry, rattling gasp came
out.
The Ricci flow. Julian began, his stutter returning with severe, violent intensity. The S singularity when T approaches 0, the manifold must.
He stopped.
He stared at his own slides. The handwriting on the screen was a chaotic, fragmented mess of half-finished equations and broken lemmas. In the past, I had spent hundreds of hours bridging those logical chasms, smoothing his erratic intuition into ironclad mathematical syntax. Alone, his thoughts were an impenetrable labyrinth with no exit. Julian switched to the 4th slide. Vivian hissed loudly from the side of the stage, her voice echoing through the live microphone. The audience began to shift uncomfortably. A prominent professor from Oxford adjusted his glasses, frowning at the glaring algebraic contradiction on the main board. "This equation does not hold for negative curvature, Mr. Dance," the Oxford professor called out politely. "Your second tensor condition violates the maximum principle. How do you resolve the energy decay?" Julian froze. His breathing turned into rapid, shallow hyperventilation. He looked at the equation. He looked at the sea of cold, analytical faces staring up at him. In his mind, he was looking for the quiet girl who always sat in the front row, with a red pen and an extra notebook, ready to step up and explain his genius to an uncomprehending world. His gaze swept the auditorium until he found me. I was sitting in the 3rd row next to Logan and Professor McLeod. I was dressed in a tailored navy blazer, my hair neatly pinned, my notebook open and filled with crisp, elegant, fully verified derivations. Julian's eyes locked onto mine. A look of desperate, animalistic pleading flooded his face. "Help me," his eyes screamed. "Fix the margins.
Save me."
I met his gaze. Slowly, deliberately, I closed my pen, shut my notebook, and looked away to whisper something into Logan's ear. Logan smiled, reached over, and laced his fingers warmly through mine. That was the final blow that shattered Julian's mind. On the grand stage of McEwen Hall, Julian Dance let out a raw, guttural shriek. He grabbed the heavy wooden podium and violently tipped it over, sending the microphone crashing to the floor in an explosion of deafening audio feedback.
He
dropped to his knees, clawing at his own face until bloody furrows opened on his cheeks, screaming incoherently at the ceiling. "It doesn't close. The loop doesn't close without the constant. Bring back the constant." Security guards rushed the stage. Vivian, horrified and utterly humiliated as Flashbulbs from academic journalists began popping across the hall, turned around and fled out the backstage exit, abandoning him entirely. As the paramedics wheeled a sedated, strapped-down Julian out through the side doors, Professor McLeod stood up, adjusted his tie, and tapped my shoulder. "Miss Vance," McLeod said with calm authority, "it appears the floor is open. Would you and Mr. Vance care to present the actual solution?" I stood up. Logan squeezed my hand and let go, giving me a nod of absolute confidence. I walked up the stage steps, stepping cleanly over the fallen podium and the scattered, useless chalk. I plugged my own USB drive into the console and my clear, structured, flawlessly rigorous proofs illuminated the grand dome. For the next 45 minutes, my voice resonated through the historic hall. Without a single tremor. I didn't need a muse. I didn't need a martyr. I was the mathematician. When I concluded the final proof, the entire auditorium, 400 of the greatest minds in Europe, rose to their feet in a thunderous standing ovation. 2 years later, the Scottish winter arrived with heavy, pristine snow, blanketing the cobblestones of the Royal Mile in quiet white. I pulled my cashmere scarf tighter around my neck as I walked out of the University of Edinburgh's publishing office, holding the fresh, hardbound copy of my first solo monograph in advanced geometric analysis. Dr. Vance. I looked up to see Logan running toward me through the swirling snowflakes, carrying a bag of roasted chestnuts and 2 steaming cups of hot chocolate. He had just finished his defense in applied computational physics, his face glowing with youth, vitality, and unburdened joy. "You're officially a published author," Logan grinned, wrapping his free arm around my waist and kissing my cold cheek. "How does it feel?" "It feels like reality," I smiled, leaning my head against a shoulder. We walked hand in hand down toward Prince's Street Gardens, where the Christmas markets were blazing with golden fairy lights, carousel music, and the sweet scent of cinnamon and mulled wine. On the way, we passed the morning news kiosk. A small, buried column in the International Science section caught my eye. Former prodigy Julian Dance transferred to permanent care facility in New Mexico. Vivian Jones sued by university endowment for embezzlement of research funds. According to the article, Julian had lost the ability to speak in complete sentences, spending his days in a specialized asylum tracing infinite geometric circles on the linoleum floor with plastic spoons, completely detached from the passage of time. Vivian, left with massive legal debts and an expelled academic record, was facing multiple civil fraud charges. I glanced at the headline for no more than 3 seconds before the biting wind flipped the newspaper page over. It felt like reading about a stranger in a history book from 3 centuries ago. There was no hatred left in me, no lingering pain, and not a single drop of pity. The karma of their hollow souls had simply collapsed under its own empty gravity. "Chloe, look," Logan pointed upward. Above Edinburgh Castle, the clouds broke apart, revealing a clear, indigo winter sky dotted with countless brilliant stars. The church bells began to chime across the city, announcing the arrival of Christmas Eve. In my past life, I had frozen to death on a night just like this, abandoned, broken, and shivering in an unheated room filled with another woman's ghosts. Tonight, my hands were warm in Logan's coat pocket. My heart was full, my mind was free, and the entire infinite universe was waiting to be written by my own hand.